Hey there, Agile Hedgehogs, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. And today, we are talking about spikes, or what you might call research stories. This actually came as a discussion topic from a good friend of mine out in California. And it is one of those things that because they are more occasional, we don't always think a lot about them or how to handle them. And of course, it's most important that your team comes up with policies that work for you. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about how I think about spikes and research stories and how I like to handle them with my teams. And hopefully that will give you some ideas that you might choose to use with your own. So what is a spike? Well, generally a spike or a research story is when in the course of your work, your team needs to do some things just to find something out. And this can take a lot of forms. It might be just getting online and reading articles. It might be trying out different tool sets. It may even be building a proof of concept, either to compare different products or to see if your idea is even viable at all. But the point is that you're doing work that doesn't necessarily end up with a tangible deliverable. It's more like you're trying to acquire knowledge that will then facilitate later work that you're going to do. So let's say, for example, you're spinning up a new project and you have some idea of the high level requirements of it, and you are thinking about data storage, and you're thinking, well, what kind of data store would work best for this? A NoSQL database, a relational database? You might not be sure. And so you do some reading and you learn some things about both databases. Maybe you do a quick trial of this product's core capabilities against both kinds of databases to see how easy it is or how well it performs. But you're doing something where the goal is to help you arrive at some kind of decision. You're acquiring knowledge. And so this can be tricky for teams because unlike your user stories where you've got acceptance criteria and tasks, and at the end of it, you've got something to deliver. At the end of a spike, you generally don't. You might have answers to questions. You might have more information than when you started, but you don't necessarily have something that you're going to release or even demo. Maybe your end users don't even care about it that much, but it needs to be done so that you can make a responsible decision. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about spikes. These things come up in just about every team. On occasion, we have to spend some time figuring things out. We have to decide the best library that we could be using for a specific function, or the best database that we could be using, or all kinds of things that we need to figure out in the course of developing software. So the first thing I want to say about spikes is you don't need to sweat trying to treat them like user stories. They aren't user stories. I think one of the things that Agile teams sometimes struggle with, especially in the beginning, is this idea that user stories are the official format for work, or they're the official format for requirements for the team, or they're the official format for all work that a team needs to do. And that's just not the case. A user story is a very specific thing. It's the articulation of a business capability or some other kind of capability that a user needs that your software will then provide. That's what a user story is. It's something that they need to do, some capability that either needs to be in the software because it's what they're doing today or will enable them to do something that they've never been able to do before. There's nothing about the user story structure or format that makes it more agile than any other way of recording the work that you need to do. So you definitely don't need to take spikes and try to shoehorn them into a user story format, a user story structure, or break it down into user stories. It's just a different type of work. I mean, you probably don't create user stories for some of the meetings you have. You probably don't create user stories for taking a restroom break. Man, I hope you don't write user stories for taking a restroom break, and I sure don't want to be around those estimation meetings when you do. But you don't need to put all the work that the team does into some kind of user story format or make user stories out of them. In fact, I find that being able to draw distinctions between the types of work that your team is doing can often help you when you're looking at areas of improvement. For example, if I'm looking at my team's metrics for the past month and I notice that half the time has been spent in meetings, or 3/4 of our time was spent fixing bugs as opposed to working on user stories, that's very valuable information because now I can see that this team is spending most of their time not delivering value to end users. They're doing other things. Now, perhaps that's justified. Perhaps there are occasions where that's what the team needs to do, but it's useful information. And now we can actually look at what kinds of work the team is actually focusing on and spending all their time on. So having clear divisions between user stories and other stuff your team might be doing is very useful information a lot of the times, that you can see where your team's focus actually is throughout the day. So I officially give you my permission to put your spikes on the board or in the team's workflow and it not be a user story, not put story points on it, not put acceptance criteria on it. So go and be free. And if your manager gives you trouble about it, just direct them to the podcast, give them my email address, and I will tell them you have my official permission. And I can promise you that stating that will have an effect. So the second thing I want to say about spikes is you do want to look for opportunities to make them subservient to some unit of deliverable value if possible. As developers, we love doing things like finding the best logging library, but is that really going to be valuable to our users? Probably not. In fact, we may even have a hard time articulating why anybody besides us would even care about that sort of thing. So when we're doing a spike, it's really useful to try to connect it ultimately to some kind of deliverable or deliverables that are going to come later. So if your team, for instance, wants to research the best data store to use for a new app that they're building, what's the first deliverable where this will have an impact? And maybe we can tie those things together, right? So maybe the research really becomes a task to delivering the deliverable, as opposed to kind of being its own standalone thing where the value of it might not be readily available to people who are looking at your work. So for instance, if I know, for example, I'm building an app that is primarily document management and most of the data that I'm storing is document metadata or file metadata, then I might be wanting to research databases because NoSQL database might be a better fit. We might get better performance. We might be able to code faster against it. So I want to research and see if that's a better fit than maybe the relational databases that we've used for everything else up to that point. So I'm able to articulate the value of that research because once we've decided that a NoSQL database is going to be perfect for this, or we invalidate that hypothesis, we find that it isn't a good fit for it, that has value because the core deliverable that we're going to produce is the ability to store document metadata. We're probably going to search and filter and things like that off of that metadata. So as part of delivering whatever that user story is, then I can clearly connect this research to that deliverable. The team needs to figure this out because if we do, then that enables us to deliver this amount of value to the user. Now, not all research that you're going to do falls under that category, but it's really great to at least have that discussion and take a look because you want to be very, very careful about your team taking on any work that doesn't really seem to have a clear value proposition for what you're going to be delivering to end users. Even if it's not direct, right? Even if it's for something that will come later, even if maybe it's more of an abstract thing that maybe affects several deliverables, you want to be able to articulate the value. I want to be able to talk to whoever's funding my team and tell them, we have to do this research and you want us to do this research because when we're done, then we will be able to make a decision or build a thing or do whatever that's going to bring you these benefits. In the long run, this is in your best interest for us to do the research. So that's the second tip I have for you, is to really try to closely connect those things. And if you find that you can't, if the research you want to do doesn't seem to be directly related to value that you're going to hand over to the people who are funding your team, then you might think about whether that research actually needs to be done. Do we really need to spend a week figuring out the best logging library? We might not. And so if I can't tie it directly to value, if I don't have clear value propositions that I can articulate, maybe that's my cue that research either doesn't need to be done or we can deprioritize it or what have you. But that brings us then to the third thing, that joke I made about spending a week searching for the perfect logging library. Unfortunately, in many environments, that's not much of a joke. That kind of thing actually happens. And so the biggest recommendation I have for you about spikes and research stories is that you time box them. Always time box them. Don't allow research to be indefinite. Don't just allow it to go on and on until you feel like you've thoroughly researched the issue. You've probably heard of the law that says that work expands to fill the time that you allocate. And I have found in my experience that that is only sometimes true. Usually, if a team is professional and they're interested in delivering value and they're all motivated, they want to get the work done as quickly and efficiently as possible, just as much as you do. However, when it comes to research, Parkinson's law definitely applies here. That research will fill whatever time you allot for it. And if you don't have a time box around it, it can very easily run on and on and on and on, well past the value that you're actually going to get out of it. So how do you set that time box? Well, the easiest way to answer that question is, what is the value of the end result of this research? How much am I willing to spend to find this answer or arrive at this solution or prove that this concept is valuable? How much is that worth? And the more it's worth to you to find that answer or prove that concept, then the more of a time box you want to give it, because ultimately your time is money when it comes to this sort of thing. If it's not worth that much to you, then you want the time box to be relatively short. Let's say, for instance, finding the perfect logging library is just not that important. So you might time box the research to a couple of hours or maybe half a day or something. But deciding what the best data infrastructure for your application is going to be, that has a little bit more impact. There's a lot of things that decision is going to impact moving forward. So making a good decision in that department is a little more important to you. So you might time box that research at a couple of days or 3 days or, however extensive an impact that's going to have. If you're trying to figure out what the next product is that you should build, you might want to make the time box on that kind of long, right? I mean, it's going to be very valuable to make the right product decision as opposed to picking the right logging library. So I can't give you a formula for exactly calculating how long that time box is going to be, but you should have one. And the time box should be proportionate to how much value that information or that decision actually has for you. Low value, not very important, small time box. Of course, there are other factors. Possibly you're researching something very complicated, and even if it's low value, it may take a while to figure out what you need to know. But that factors into the decision of whether that research even needs to be done, right? It's a complicated thing. We're going to have to spend a lot of time on it. Does this need to be done? What's the value we're going to get out of it? Is this worth it at all? Those are always questions that you need to ask yourself. And once you've set that time box, stick to it. If you've decided that research should only go for 2 days on your issue, then stop at 2 days. There's always more research you could be doing. There's always more information you could be acquiring. There's always more detail you can add to a proof of concept or more scenarios that you can prove out with your proof of concept. There really is no end to the amount of information you can acquire when you're in that kind of research, prototyping, testing phase of things. So you're just going to have to stop yourself. You're just going to have to draw that line in the sand and say, once we've invested this amount of time, this amount of money, that's all I'm willing to invest to come up with a good decision here. And so we will just make the best decision we can. I mean, the great thing about being on an Agile team and building software in an Agile way is very few decisions are irreparable. Right? We should be coding in ways that our code is isolated from the volatility of many of these decisions. And so even if we make the wrong decision, then when we have to walk them back, then we might be looking at a few days worth of work as opposed to months. So we shouldn't sweat it too much. We shouldn't rush into decisions, obviously. I mean, all of these things are just guidelines, right? If you set a time box for 2 days and you get to the end of those 2 days and your team is telling you, look, we still really don't know what we need to know. Okay, yeah, throw an extra day on there if that works out for you, right? But you want to have that time box because it's just the tendency of teams and the nature of research for it to be infinite, right? There's always more books, always more blogs, always more options, always more products you could look at, always more scenarios you could run. And you're just going to have to decide when you've done enough, when you've got enough information that you can make a reasonably good decision and move forward, knowing that if you're building resilient software in an agile manner, you can quickly recover, even if you've made a poor decision as far as all that goes. So I hope this helps you as you are doing research work. Of course, any work that your team does need to be visible in some way, but it doesn't need to be a user story. You don't need to sweat how to make your research stuff look like user stories or fit a user story format or run the way the rest of your user stories run as far as your normal workflow is concerned. It is good, however, to try to tie that research to user stories or some kind of deliverable so that you can explain the value of why that research has to happen. And ultimately, whatever research you do, make sure that you have agreed on a time box of when you're going to stop and then you're going to make a decision based on the information that you've acquired. And I hope that just enables you to have spikes just as a part of your workflow that isn't disruptive and actually gets you to where you need to go. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.